Today, I want to talk about the sky and clouds. The sky is the key to everything in our landscapes. It's the predictor of moods. It is the thing that tells the story in our canvases. It could be overcast and gloomy, sunny and bright, or cloudy and mysterious, stormy, dramatic. The sky affects everything in our painting. So the sky could either be the big main star, which is what I was hoping for today, or it could be a smaller part to accompany a landscape composition. A little sixth grade earth science here. The sky is what we see between the earth and the stratosphere, known as the troposphere. That circles the globe like a dome. All the weather we experience and sky we see is within this layer. If we are, this little dot is me on the globe here. If I look up, the distance, which could be anywhere from 10 to 14 miles, is actually considerably shorter than when I am looking straight across the earth as far as I can see into the horizon. The sky will change in color and value from top to bottom, and that's because of the particles in the earth, the moisture droplets, dust, pollution. As we're looking across, we're seeing so much more of that. So what you're going to get is a variation in sky colors. So when you look straight up, you're getting a kind of blue-purple, followed by a little more green-blue, followed by a little more yellow, and then down along the bottom, and it's pretty evident today because we've got such a far view to the distant horizon. There's always a sort of a red-orange mix into this blue, which will give you a sort of a gray spacing along the bottom. The value and colors not only change top to bottom, they change left to right, depending on the position of the sun. So the sun on the left side is going to be brighter than the right side. The same atmospheric perspective that affects the sky color is also going to affect the clouds. So clouds overhead are going to be bright and white, and as they go in the distance, they become subtler, duller, less contrasted, and a little grayer. Here's another illustration of the dome that we're looking at and looking far into the distance. So this view is the same as me looking forward under the globe. This is the turning overhead, and in the distance, everything becomes far smaller. These are little shapes of cumulus clouds from large to small. Today we've got a different type of cloud. It's more of a cirrus, at some points stratus, but it is basically fair weather sky. But there's some beautiful directions going on following the wind, which will allow me to make some pretty interesting shapes. Shapes are very important in all of painting, but when you come to clouds, which is something that is moving constantly. In fact, that area that we're looking at, the troposphere between the Earth and the stratosphere, comes from the Greek word for turn or change. And indeed, these clouds are moving and changing quickly. So the best way to work with them is to design and compose your clouds. They're going to be moved and gone anyway in 2 minutes. So make their shapes work for your composition and what you want to say. I did some illustration the other day in practice, and I'm just doing shapes here, and in here I've added some value. these are things that you really need to play with. And the couple of minutes it takes to play with them here will save you a ton of time from when you're trying to paint them later and then change your mind on how your shapes look. You need the variety of size, of shape, not only in the clouds, but the spacing between them. So I'm going to set up right now to do a few sketches and catch the scene in front of me, including these clouds, before they're gone and moved away. So here are some more cloud shapes that I had been working on earlier. I had done a preliminary drawing. These are cumulus clouds. We've got a little bit of that today, but not too much. But my point of bringing this out right now is that I want you to be mindful that clouds can be considered almost like a box in the sky. They've got a top, a bottom, and depending on where the sun is hitting, and in this case, from this direction, here is the most sunlight on all these top spots, because that's the direction. Lighter on the top, mid-tone here, darkest at the bottom because the sun is coming from above. Today, we've got a similar situation, but the clouds are so thin, they're not thick enough to really describe that type of depth and volume. These are thinner clouds. And so they're mixed with enough blue from the sky behind them that they're not going to be the totally white bright we'll see on a cumulus cloud day. So jumping into what we've got today, I'm putting in a couple of quick as I can simply shapes right now so that I can figure out what my composition is going to be. The wind is directing these clouds, and I'm able to pick that up and put that into my drawing. I'm using a toned paper, which will then allow me, I'll use the gray tone of the paper to represent the value of the sky. And I'll do a couple of these very quickly. And interesting enough, by the time I'm done doing them, the clouds will have changed and I can pick up, I'm literally looking out and taking from different parts of the sky that I'm looking to give me shapes for my composition that will work. I'm doing these very quick. There's no need for any kind of detail, simply shapes. And I'm going to try a horizontal. A little bit bigger. By the way, my horizon line when I look out, which is just literally what is exactly in front of your eye, is absolutely on the horizon line of the water. So I can direct both the landmass in that direction as well as the clouds. So what I've determined is that this little notch and this patch of green is really where I'm going to want the eye to be headed toward. And so I'm going to use the shapes of clouds, even if they're different than they're out there, to sort of head the eye down to that location. Speaking of shapes, I just put in a few shapes here. Try to make these clear, and automatically I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 shapes that are exactly the same. So immediately I want to be aware of that and change these shapes because they're too similar. But that's what makes it so easy and fun at this point. You can move and change things however it seems to work. So often what I will do first is put in my largest shape, which is going to be from here. I'm using the darker pencil lines just for emphasis. And then I'll add somewhat smaller, different shapes to work with that larger shape. If this is my focal point and it's slightly to the left, I will counterbalance that with sort of this larger mass in the upper right. Now, this is, again, a playtime. I can change this composition and move it over. So this is more in the left-hand bottom section. As I always do want to keep mindful of my composition and have my focal point somewhere between the center and the far corners of the composition. Okay, I'm going to set up for some painting now. So I've set up to work out an underpainting. I want my design, which I've started on my paper. I'm going to repeat that same thing here, but I'm going to do it in value. If you do it in value here, then when you go to mix paint, you can kind of forget about, you're still always mindful of the value, but you've already conquered and established a lot of the decisions, so you can focus a little bit differently. So the first thing I did, as always, is establish my horizon line. And I put this very pale X on, because I know I don't want things to be a focal point in the center. And I'm going to want what I decided to be my focal point to end up landing right about here, which is midway between the corner and that. Could be here, could be here, could be here. I just don't want it off the edge or too close to the middle. So I'm going to put in the shapes of this landmass first. You can use your brush or you can use drawing stick to get some of these directional lines, which are guides to aiming and directing your eye. And I'm just doing this in a burnt sienna underpainting because it is very quick to dry and it will give me some warm darks. This little secondary island I can put as a secondary focus out near the intersection of my X, which works out actually quite perfectly. It's low tide, so it's visible. I'm not sure if it's going to show up later. Okay, onto the clouds. Of course, they've moved away again, but I'm going to use what I see huge, large mass coming down here. Again, I'm putting in the biggest shape first. Got a little window of blue sky here. Down along the bottom is that lovely blue gray pale, which will help give me some great depth by having that color change from the darker blue down to the gray, and also from the whiter clouds down to the darker, more subtle clouds. By the time you get to the horizon line, there's barely a difference between the sky and the clouds. And we've got a window of blue over here as well, which I want to utilize. It's a little puff over here, and then the rest is very quiet. And that's very close to my original composition. Let me fill this in for some more clarity. What I'm putting in are the negative shapes, otherwise what would be the blue of the sky, so that you can see more clearly what I'm looking at. And these will dry by the time I have figured out, I have mixed up my colors. The sun-bleached light of the rocks are actually a lighter value than the water, so I've toned that, and along the water's edge we get a little darker. Which is just the seaweed piled up. Let me reinstate this island in the back. And step back and take a look and make some adjustments. I put this all in with a very thick, wide brush for quickness, and just a few details, and I'll be ready to go. Okay, now I'm going to start mixing up some colors, and because the focus is on the clouds and sky, that is the main thing that I'm going to do. So I've mixed up some sky color, just a basic blue, and I'll adjust that and put that in. I may have typically started with the darkest darks and worked my way out, but this sky is changing awfully fast. In fact, we may disappear. I'm looking at some beautiful dark purple blue, relatively speaking. Over here, over here, it's really quite more cerulean looking and a lot paler. So it's going to be fun to put in these different values and very subtle hint changes of color. So far, I've just got ultramarine and white. I'm adding a pinhead of alizarin and a little more ultramarine for that darker spot. When I'm mixing the sky colors, I'm a little more generous with my paint. And that's because the edges of the clouds, which are nothing more than water vapor, dissipate. And so the edges of these clouds are super soft, and I need enough paint to be able to merge those two edges together. If you have them somewhat hard-edged, it's going to look like you've got cinder blocks ready to fall from the sky. So you do want to keep them really super soft-edged. Against this orange, it's looking pretty electric. So I can look up and take the color that I see, but I'm keeping the shapes quite the same. Just a little touch of solvent and medium. And I'm going to set some of this above because I may need to add it later into what I'm doing. And I'll take that same ultramarine blue and white combination, add a little bit of light to it, and a little bit of yellow. And these are just subtle tints, but it will make a difference. This giant cloud has a beautiful edge to it. I'm going to go from here right into the lower cloud mass, which is a grayer, and the bottom actually really has a warmer tint to it. So I'm going to take my blue, add some orange to it, and a little alizarin, because it's got a purplish cast. And let me take a value check. It's sitting right in here. So sometimes if I have to guess, I'll just check. And you can see it's lighter than this one and darker than that one. So this is pretty right on. Add a smidge more warmth to it. Keying your values is tricky and tough. If you get the first one wrong and you don't correct it, because they are right next to each other, you'll make each one incorrect. So I'm pretty careful about starting out my values. And in this case, we're super low on the scale. So this is almost the same color as the sky. In fact, at one point over there, it's barely perceptible. So it's really going to be a temperature difference more than a value difference in this case. In fact, I'm going to add a little more warmth because I want to emphasize that. And it will also help it retreat into the distance with that warmth. Again, I want to keep it fairly thick, have enough paint on there because I want to be able to have enough to merge. I don't know if you can see this, but I want to give you a comparison between gray of the clouds and the base color there, the pale gray clouds in this. And as it starts to rise, this clouds from the horizon, the clouds will become lighter and less gray. As we move away from that pile of pollution, which I think in this case is coming up from Long Island. So when it comes to painting the sky, I've got to take some extra precautions to make sure that I don't have even the slightest amount of the wrong color that will mix in and change the tone, because this is real subtle, totally high end of the value scale that I'm working with. So I've got some pure white out here, and you can see how incredibly subtle these differences are, but they're important differences. Now I've taken a look and decided I needed to darken this up a bit for more contrast. Of course, until you put it in, you can't sometimes tell if it's too much. I've lightened that a smidge. That's better. So even though I put white here, I just wanted that to be as a contrast, but nothing here is going to be white. In fact, I don't know if you can see, but if I hold up this super white piece of material, cardboard, you can see that everything is slightly, even though it looks super bright, it's not. And as the edges go into the blue, it will definitely change. So I've got one with a little warmth in it and one that's got the cool blue edges for the sky up above. And I'm keeping those separate because I don't want to confuse the two or muddle them, because it is such slightly different. So I want to add a little more blue and white, still a little warmer than below. Trying to get this to flow a little bit, so I've added tiny bits of solvent and a little bit of medium. If you add too much of the medium, it ends up, in my mind, looking a little plasticky and shiny, so I keep it minimum. Now this big white cloud is really a mixture of two values and two temperatures. I'm getting some super cool light white and then variations within that. Yet, it's still, I need to keep it as one solid mass. Clouds have totally and completely changed, but I'm able to borrow from things that I see. This is strictly white with just a little bit of the sky color mixed in it. And I'm keeping these two brushes, the cool and the warm, separate. Cumulus clouds will have such a greater range of value because those larger volumes of moisture will show you the effect of sunlight so much clearer. None of this lighter material will go down toward the bottom. And at some point, because it affects what's above, I want to put in the value and color of the water. I knew this was going to be clouds and shapes, but I didn't expect this was going to be such a big lesson on edges, but you can clearly see that it's needed. I'm going to take a slightly smaller brush and start to manipulate some of these edges a little bit. As they go into the blue sky, you could do one of two things. I could either soften this between here, but my preference is to mix some blue sky into my cloud value and lay that along the edge to break that. I'm laying this paint down super lightly on top of the sky mass and in the direction that the clouds are going. Let me go back to the darker gray. And I'm likely to have to reinstate some of the blue sky for clarity that peek out in between these lower cloud masses. And they diminish a little bluer toward the edges. So I'm working with 3 brushes, the warmer, the cooler, and something in between. going to drop down to doing this watercolor, which is getting overcasted and will soon be gray, I fear. So I'm just doing ultramarine blue, white, and I'm adding a little transparent oxide red to warm it up because it does have that cast to it. Ooh, that's way too dark. Indeed, the only way you can tell is to just, one dot is all you need, and you'll see whether your value in color is correct. Doing better. The one line that has to be absolutely straight on the horizon is the water. So I will be a little more careful about getting that in. And for the purpose of today's demonstration, I'm not even going to articulate painting these rocks. I will do those in a series later, especially since I'm losing the light. I've lost the sunlight that I had before. The water will pick up a little more blue color from the sky and has more differences between the value as it gets closer. The effect of atmospheric perspective affects everything, including the distant water. So I will be adding a progress of images so that you can see what's happened to the development of the rocks as I go along. This water has a clear reflection of the moss in front of it, so I'm adding a little bit of that in. It's part of the darks, which will help balance out this composition. And this is, I'm using a super limited palette. I've gone no farther than ultramarine blue, white. I've got a touch of yellow. And I've used a couple touches of alizarin and my burnt sienna. And that's about it.
What are you doing for racing? Anything? Your personal best to yourself?
Let's get that back.
Head stick him, the second one.
As it gets closer, it has a little more warmth in it because of the bottom, mud bottom of the shallow water right here. Now this is meant to be a pretty quick color study, more than a finished painting, which is really all you can do with such outrageously changing conditions. I might take some photos for shape references, but this color study is totally important. That's why I'm doing a small painting. I'm more interested in getting my colors and values correct. I can take it to the studio and develop it if I prefer, or sometimes I'll come back and do the same exact thing on a larger canvas in the same spot if the day is similar. I'm going to add a little more of the blue back in the sky in a couple spots, and then I think we're going to wrap this up for today.
You do it one more time, you have to put your bike away. You can go from here all the way down there as far as you want and back to here. You share the space over here.
I think that that's all for today. I'll be showing a series of images, still images, as I progress with this painting, and I may come back another day as well because it's getting completely clouded over. Happy painting, everybody.